A tale as old as time, the value and worth of a video game, whether that's how the game looks, how it plays, the story. So many factors contributed to good and bad games and have only managed to increase in number over the generations. But one always rings in my mind, and apparently millions of others, at least thousands, and that's the frame rate. How much a good frame rate adds or devalues a game. Does it make it worth the purchase or not? Blah blah blah. And I've mentioned before, unless it kinda matters, I'm not too huge of a graphics whore. If it looks stunning or has a fantastic art direction, then obviously I'm gonna be like, damn, I can marry these graphics. And that type of mental space personally is pretty similar to my opinions when it comes to frame rate. So compared to graphics and visuals, even less so do I make it much of a point to talk about the frame rate with games. I probably should a little more often, but thus far, not really. So, what about frame rate is making me talk about it now? Simply because I use Twitter, and because of restricted character count, loss of nuance made under the majority of tweets unless you're making a thread about it, and my lack of wording it better than I could have, and or using a thread format, right now, I made a tweet regarding a hot debate as of the past couple days. And I mean an uber spicy, muy caliente, ludicrously boiling debate online, when it probably shouldn't have. And it's regarding the remake for Paper Mario: The Thousand Year Door, because this remake, albeit for a while now, has revealed and confirmed the frame rate for it is locked at 30 frames per second. And being confirmed by gaming journalists who got a hold of the embargo, it sparked a very massive conversation surrounding it. But personally speaking, this reignites a conversation that's been going around for years at this point. Essentially since the Switch started, people have been arguing frame rates for so long, especially with Nintendo games. But of course, because it's revolving around Paper Mario for the time being, that was only primed to get spicier than normal. So, the Thousand Year Door remake is 30 frames per second. It's caused a lot of vocal opinions, lukewarm or genuinely against the decision, and for half of this video, I'm gonna chime in with my own 2 cents regarding this entire ordeal, and it'll explain more of what I was trying to say in my tweets. So this critique, it's not unfounded. The original Thousand Year Door, it ran at 60 frames, no problem, back on the GameCube. So it's completely fair that people aren't happy that this remake's FPS is cut in half. Thus fair, for me anyways, that's the only genuine downgrade this remake has. People point to a waterfall or the way the sun's positioned in Riverside Station when it's setting as the game looking worse than the original, but like over 99% of the rest of the game looks so impressive with the new textures, skyboxes, models, animations, dynamic lighting, and whatnot. So one can argue there's more than just the frame rate, and sure, 1 or 2 types of the objects in the game thus far looks off or wrong, but I heavily disagree overall. Just the frame rate so far. Only genuine downgrade. This remake really should be 60 frames per second, I do think that, and I do agree it is disappointing we're not getting a crisp, gorgeous remake that's elevating to the original at 60 frames per second. It won't be the absolute best it can be. That is a valid disappointment, especially when the original managed to do it on much weaker hardware. Nintendo, please make hardware for any of your games that can handle 60 frames per second, because that is the modern standard at this point. I also agree there. Even with all of that, I still pre-ordered the game and don't mind it much in the grand scheme. It's disappointing, sure, don't get me wrong, but like, it's Thousand Year Door. It's also a built from the ground up remake of TTYD, and it's still adding a lot of finer details and a few major tweaks and additions to make an already S-tier Mario game even better. Even ignoring the greater Paper Mario history and the changes it went through for what this remake's existence stands for, I'm still uber hyped for the game. I'm still copping at day 1 with all my hype and expectations intact. The 30 frames per second is primarily a small, minuscule gripe that's almost ignorable, but that's just my opinion. The controversy sparked from this whole ordeal is that it has become a deal breaker for some people, if not just case 48,653, of people blowing up another Nintendo title not being 60 frames per second. But I'm gonna slow down, that's for the second half. But what I will say, no matter what I say, my opinions or anyone else's, it pretty much never mattered. Any breathing person can buy whatever for any reason, or avoid buying whatever for any reason. It could be the most logical, sane, reasonable takes for why one would want to buy any type of entertainment no matter what it is, but in this case, games. It's made with high quality, it controls right, or it just feels right. The level design's great, the story's amazing, the music's good, etc. But even for the best types of entertainment out there, the opposite opinions and reasons for avoiding that are just as apt. It doesn't look appealing. The art style doesn't look good, or the graphics, whatever. It doesn't play or feel well to control, the level design's ass, or even the frame rate is bad, etc. Even if the game in question had quite literally the exact opposite of what one person says, even in the most literal sense that can be disproven, that doesn't matter. It's that person's right to buy or not buy if they so choose. The reasoning can be the most backwards, illogical, or ridiculous sounding reasoning ever, but it's their right. It's their money, and we can provide some extra context or our perspective if it differs, even if it doesn't, but it's still within their right as it is within their financial right. Even for just games being 30 frames per second, if people don't feel obligated to pick up the game, that's completely valid. It's their right. It's their money, like I said. I could prattle on about how surface level that feels, or how petty it is, because I tried tweeting that out, but my point was what I feel, that part. It was all subjective. I don't care how many people wince or clock out at the sight or hearing of the words objective and subjective, no matter how much it feels like a buzzword, whatever. That is literally what this is. I was highlighting what actually is true and applies to these people and the situation, as well as my own mental feelings, which doesn't. It's just how I felt. Not copying an amazing game just because it's 30 frames per second feels very petty to me. It feels short-sighted and ignorant to everything else to what the game's offering, but again, that's purely, objectively, my subjective opinion, and the opposite is way more apt. What's objective is that it's within their right to not even bother because of it. It doesn't matter how I react or respond emotionally. People are very well within their right to disagree with everything I'm saying as well. It's no problem to feel different from what I'm saying right now. And all of this is withstanding that I still agree the frame cut is a downgrade and a worthy critique no matter what side you're on or how it's spun. I'm saying it's a critique worth telling Nintendo and Intelligent Systems. It's completely just. I do wish the game was 60 frames, and that is and should be the standard for pretty much every game out there in this day and age. I never said it wasn't and shouldn't be. I just feel not buying the game solely because of that alone is ignoring everything else surrounding the remake. How it looks, what it does to elevate Thousand Year Door, the new soundtrack, the buffed fast travel, the whole Paper Mario ordeal, so on and so on. To me, it feels like a non-issue taking issue to that when everything else about the remake is honestly near perfect. But again, pure opinion, not fact. The only other thing I could even speculate with this decision specifically is just why, because the one thing that did set me off was the idea that this was a lazy decision. I feel like in this day and age, it has to be a very super ridiculously obvious aspect or even an overall game to tell if it actually was lazy. Something like Call of Duty Modern Warfare 3 2023, just purely as an example, that makes a lot more sense. The campaign is short and haphazard. A lot of it in the maps are repurposed from Advanced Warfare. All of the Modern Warfare 2 stuff is being put in MW3 instead of the MW2 remaster, etc. That makes way more sense to call lazy because it's blatantly obvious Activision screwed the pooch with that game, and pretty much every Call of Duty fan was appalled at Modern Warfare 3 for all of that and way more. But just a 30 frames per second output all on its own as a mark of laziness feels really ridiculously detached from what constitutes as lazy game development. Once again, 60 frames per second should be the standard, but stuff like that pretty much preaches those who believe that don't know how game development works at all. You want to talk about buzzwords? I'm fairly sure lazy is one of them, because majority of the time, it's not an apt description. The closest perspective we have regarding this is Abebe Tinari, a developer behind Syriza and the Lost Demon, Bayonetta Origins, empathizing with the devs behind the remake because they struggle to make Bayo Origins a stable 60 frames because of the forest area and either unlock it with frequent dips to 30 and 50 frames or just lock it at 30. As a developer, you're tasked with making choices on what to prioritize, everything being at a cost, the large amount of post-processing going on under the hood, even for games that may have more simpler styles, etc. Link's Awakening dealt with this exact same issue. The processing cost for the visuals alone, for all we know, is probably why not even just this remake, but the Origami King, Color Splash, even Sticker Star to a smaller degree. Those games plus the first Paper Mario for more obvious reasons there, but they were all 30 frames per second, and at least with the modern titles, there is way more polish and detail put on the papercraft cardboard style, all the creases and layers, the lighting, the textures, etc. This remake and Origami King do look like some of the most visually stunning games on Switch, and it's an assumption from this developer. It's not the truth, we don't know, but unless the Paper Mario team clarifies in interviews, this is the closest thing we can think of as to why Thousand Year Door is 30 frames now. It'd be a different scenario if this was a native port of the original game remastered like Pikmin 1 and 2 or Metroid Prime remastered, but once again, an example like 12 now, this is a remake built from the ground up. And we're still not sure it's what actually happened. We don't know for sure unless they tell us themselves. It could be specific areas where the hordes of dull bones, fuzzies, and smorgs pop in, because there's like 100 of them on screen. Maybe that might have tanked the frame rate, or an area like Keel Hulk Key or something. We literally have no idea what went on behind the scenes. The best we have is input from an actual game developer giving their 2 cents, and it does broaden the picture a bit. And it would track as to why 2/3 of the Paper Mario series run at 30 frames. Not as an excuse, just making sense as to why and how the process works. The only other hope we have is Switch 2 having the stronger specs to handle 60 frames, because that's been rumored for a while now. It'll be backwards compatible with other games, and they'll give, like Breath of the Wild, for example, 60 frames instead of the 30. And it can happen. I wouldn't expect it because it's only hearsay, but it is a possibility. That said, as much as either the decisions to not dip because of it, or the overreactions feeling short-sighted and stuck up, it's all valid rights to make those calls, but some are making it out as simpler than any of us legitimately know, and it is still a great Mario game made even greater. I feel it should still be given to as many people as possible. We Need All Hands on Deck was a corny piece of it. It was corny as hell, I will admit, when it comes to that tweet, but I do really want this game to not just sell, but any type of person to play it, because it's one of my favorite Mario games ever. As it stands right now, the game probably will at worst outsell Origami King. If Super Mario RPG can come out of the gate swinging with over 3 million copies in 6 weeks, there's a strong chance Thousand Year Door might achieve similar results, if not higher, given its status and dropping on Switch with a 140+ million user install base. But it's also from the perspective that I'm taking every potential possibility of telling Nintendo and Intelligent Systems, hey guys, please make more Paper Mario games like Thousand Year Door. And unless it actually dips past 30 frames to 24, 15, and whatnot to a point where it actively does hamper the experience, or where it's unplayable, I really don't believe it is all that of a major issue, especially if it's consistently 30. To me, consistency of frame rates matter. 60 is obviously better, but as long as it's stable to where you can play the game without any frame struggles, whether 60 or 30, there's nothing inherently wrong with that. The primary issue people have with this decision is the action command timings, especially super guarding, but at worst, it's going to be a 1/16th of a second more forgiving. We're given a 100th of a second more frames to do it. And once again, Paper Mario 64 was 30 frames. Same for Sticker Star, same for Color Splash, same for Origami King. And it doesn't matter, it really doesn't, how many problems or strengths those games had when it came to the frame rate and timing of action commands. As far as that's concerned, we managed just fine with those 4 games. No one ever talked about the frame rate for those games at all. I think we're gonna live. And beyond that, there's not really any other instance where that frame rate is gonna matter that much. All this pretty much is why I share the core critique of the lack of 60 frames being disappointing, but I'm not gonna lose much sleep over. I wish some of those people who preach the same stuff fans like me were with Paper Mario for a decade now, they still backed up those words and bought the remake, but it was unrealistic, I guess. But reminder, this isn't a Paper Mario thing entirely. The frames debate, honestly, feels like it's been strictly a Nintendo thing for the longest time. There are a couple games on other platforms that crack at 30, but PC if you have the proper specs. PS5, Xbox Series S and X, even to a lesser extent Xbox One and PS4. None of these systems really have many games and tentpole titles that struggle with frames or foster this argument of frame rates to begin with. And I'm gonna go ahead and assume this frame rate debacle is within a minority of people. From my experience, it's just largely been Twitter people making a problem out of it, but even outside of that, it's pretty plausible to assume most don't immediately care or look for this sort of thing. Don't get it twisted, 60 frames should be the standard. Sonic games should be 60 frames per second because it's a speed fest. Fighting games, multiplayers, shooters, etc., they need 60 frames for a stable experience and precise inputs and positioning. But outside the Nintendo sphere, Uncharted 4's campaign is 30 frames per second on PS4, and it took the PS5 for GTA 5 to run at 60. But outside that, damn near every game on all the other platforms are 60 frames per second. Meanwhile, half of Nintendo's library has games between both 60 frames and 30. But alongside that, the Switch and so many titles are massive successes. This frame rate stuff, genuinely speaking, started with Breath of the Wild. That game was Game of the Year 2017, millions of people's favorite games, favorite Zeldas, etc., and it ran at 30. Tears of the Kingdom, the exact same way. Animal Crossing New Horizons is the same thing. Luigi's Mansion 3, all the Pokemon games, the Xenoblade trilogy, the Fire Emblem titles, etc. Yeah, Mario Odyssey can handle 60 frames, Smash Ultimate can and needs it, Mario Wonder, Mario Kart 8, ARMS, Splatoon 2 and 3, Metroid Prime Remastered, and Dread, but amidst a lot of those lower frame rate games like Zelda, Pokemon, Animal Crossing, and Luigi's Mansion in particular, they still played a major part in pushing the Switch and becoming a lot of people's favorites anyways. Pokemon's debatable, but there's still a bunch of games that did numbers and a lot of love. The frame rate pretty much having nothing to do with that. And for those games with the 60 frames, it's appreciated, it's the standard and stable, but a large part of those games' success and praise is everything else and beyond and or surrounding the frame rate. The design, the controls, the style, the themes, ideas, blah blah blah. Yes, every game needs a frame rate at all to play properly. You need some consistent frame rate for every video game to function. That's not my point. My point is there's always been so much to these video games that the frame rate shouldn't be the first major problem for most of those people to have, unless it actually actively hampers the experience by dipping. Once again, to me, in my own subjective opinionated sphere, in my smooth brain up here that's full ideal than truth that you're more welcome to disagree on, the consistency should matter way more. Should they always strive for 60 frames per second? Of course. Does it automatically invalidate any of these games just because it's consistent with 30 frames per second? Hell no. It's better if 60, but fine if consistent 30 or 60. It really only becomes problematic if it lacks that consistency and dips down to 15, 24, 5 frames, etc. But as long as it's stable to where you can play the game without any frame struggles, whether 60 or 30, there's nothing inherently wrong with that. There is and should be a standard at the bare minimum, the barest of absolute surface level minimums for several genres. First-person shooters, kart racers, multiplayers in general, fighting games, even party games, etc. should be 60 frames. But in Paper Mario's case, 30 frames isn't detrimental to it or any RPG for that matter. And most of these Switch games that lock in at 30 frames manage with a consistent output, for the most part, and are beloved and cherished regardless. Plus, let's be honest with this too, it just boils down to the Switch itself. It's the exact same talk we've had for years of the Switch being the most underpowered console by 2 generations. It's all technical capabilities and boundaries set by these systems. It's always been the Switch. 1,000 Year Door can't handle 30 frames. It's the Switch, bro. A lot of these games, 1,000 Year Door included, probably can't handle more than 30 just because it's the Switch. That's why I feel this debate is both a long-standing debate for 7+ years now, and also one of a vocal minority. It did start with having this portable system that's barely stronger than a Wii U, which was more or less comparable to a PS3 and Xbox 360. This FPS stuff with 1,000 Year Door didn't start with 1,000 Year Door. It started once the Switch came to market and only became a bigger vocal point once the Xbox Series X and the PS5 came to market a few years later. And frame rate is not often a thing you talk about majority of the time with a majority of people who play games. People are underselling the idea that, oh, most people don't notice 30 frames compared to 60, when I'm more confident it's the fact that most people don't care in general. The games I listed off, besides probably Modern Warfare 3 2023, are all insanely fun games that bring their own flavor and fun to the table, regardless of their frame rate. And people care way more about whether or not it's a fun game than what its frame rate is. If the game can be designed around those 30 frames, or both it and 60, even better. I can list off 10 things about these games people care way more about than the frame rate, and those things carry way more value and weight to those games than whether it's 30 frames or 60. The crux of this argument is 30 FPS versus 60 FPS, an outdated standard compared to the new constant one across every other platform, and Nintendo, as always, is lagging behind. The only thing we can hope for is the next system, hopefully Switch 2, meets those rumors and speculation of handling far stronger hardware and getting mad close to its competition in that regard, while also handling this generation's games under stronger frame rate, resolution, and processing power. Best case scenario pretty much is that, and yet we don't know if any of that will be true. It's ultimately fine for any person to decide to not pick up any game, no matter the reason or logic, just as it is to buy it for any reasoning, including a 30-second frame rate. I'm definitely putting a lot of stock and hoping 1,000 Year Door sells well, which it has a high chance it will, but I do believe if this game sells a lot, it will cause some effect to Nintendo and Intelligent Systems that, hey, maybe this is the type of Paper Mario we should make going forward. We should adopt the formula. They're already remaking that exact title. They put out the surveys, and if those outcries and pleas come through in making this remake sell, it pretty much does give Paper Mario's future an even higher chance it goes back to form. Sales don't always equal another installment in a series or that game's formula being continued. Not always, I'm well aware, but majority of the time, it genuinely does. Why do you think we keep getting way more games from all these popular franchises adopting that style and building upon it? Dragon Quest, Pokemon, 2D Mario, 3D Mario, top-down and 3D Zelda, Final Fantasy, most Mario spin-offs across the sports games, kart, party, etc., Call of Duty, Tekken, Street Fighter, Smash, so on, so on, so on, and so on. And for all we know, that may be a reason why Paper Mario was the way it has been. Super's nothing like any other title in the series, yet it was the first to make a radical shift to the series and its formula. Sticker Star sold second best for almost a decade, and the next two titles carry a lot of that game's restrictions, ideas, philosophies, and such regardless. Yeah, we don't have a Super Paper Mario 2, but there's no reason to not make that true Paper Mario 3, one more RPG focused with more original characters, set pieces, and story, if this remake sold the absolute best it can after being coupled with the decade-plus long widespread community backlash and criticisms. All hands on deck doesn't apply, but the best I can say is it's an amazing Paper Mario title that is the format of Paper Mario a lot of the fans have been requesting for a long time, even if it is a remake. Obviously, if you own the original and are content with that, that's completely perfectly fine, but I'm still getting the remake while still having my original copy because it looks like an amazing remake. And ignoring it's one of my favorite games of all time, if it does send another message straight to these companies that the next installment should adopt Thousand Year Door's formula and creative ideas, then I don't mind doing my part if that is the case. We don't know if it is or isn't, but I pre-ordered it anyways to be safe. Otherwise, that's my 2 cents on the matter. Let me know your thoughts down below in the comments. Hopefully this painted a clearer picture to what I was trying to say yesterday on Twitter. But thank you very much for watching. Until next time, stay super.
嘿，妹妹，嘿，我来呀！共和到哈哈呀！拉面，嘿，来面，白哥面，共和。